The barn was older than memory, all rough boards, sun-bleached gray, and bowed by years of wind and work. In the early light, it breathed dust and silence, as if the world hadn't yet remembered to wake. The rooster had crowed, but only once. Even he seemed unsure what to make of the sight laid gently in the hay. She was curled like something once broken, and now wrapped around its own warmth. A woman, barefoot, dress, hem-torn, her long skirt wrapped around two sleeping shapes, no bigger than sacks of flour, and a chicken. Of all things, a rusty white hen tucked beneath her elbow, clucking softly in dreams. Silas Boone stood in the doorway, hat in hand. He wasn't a man quick to surprise. His eyes moved slow, like clouds over canyon stone. But even he had to blink, twice. Not just because there was a woman in his hay, but because of the quiet. She wasn't hiding. She was just resting. He stepped forward once, boot stirring straw. The hen's head jerked up, one eye bead black and sharp, caught him and held it. Then she settled again, cooing low. One of the children shifted, a little boy, perhaps 3, and the woman drew him closer with an arm-like instinct. Not thought. The children were twins. The boy and a girl, both flax-haired and freckled with sun, clutched close to their mother's ribs like flowers growing through gravel. The woman's lips were chapped. Her cheek bore a streak of soot or bruised dust. Her shoes, one laced, one bare, lay beside her like they'd fallen off in sleep. Silas crouched low, resting on his haunches. "Ma'am," he said, soft as wind through sagebrush, "this ain't no place to die." Her eyes fluttered. Not fear, not at first. Just the kind of weariness you see in animals that have been chased too long. "I wasn't planning to," she whispered. He nodded once, as if that settled things. The chicken blinked at him. Her name was Maybelle Grace. She said it like someone saying it for the first time in months, like she'd forgotten she had one. Her voice carried the faint lilt of Tennessee, worn down by road and silence. She didn't ask for anything, not even when her stomach growled louder than the rooster. Silas handed her a tin mug with warm milk and said, "There's more, if you and the little ones don't mind it warm." She nodded, sipped, closed her eyes like milk was a memory. The twins woke slowly, blinking and sticky with sleep. They didn't cry, just looked around the barn with wide eyes, and then at the chicken, who fluffed herself indignantly and strutted to a pile of feed like it was all hers, by right. "That's Pearl," Maybelle said quietly. "She don't like loud men." Silas chuckled. "Then I reckon I'll get on her good side." He stood up, wiped his hands on his trousers. "You can stay," he said after a moment. His voice had no edge, no weight. Just a thought spoken aloud. She looked at him then, really looked, and said, "Why?" Silas looked out toward the rising sun, the light falling slow across the land like gold dripping off the sky. "Because you're already here," he said, "and I ain't got the heart to chase someone off who's softer than my mule and twice as quiet." She blinked at him, uncertain. He adjusted his hat and added, without smiling, "You can stay, if it don't snore." It took her a moment. Then her lips curved, just slightly, and the little girl laughed, that sudden bubbling sound of a child who hasn't laughed in too long and doesn't quite know why it came out now. Pearl squawked. They didn't move into the house that day, Silas offered, but Maybelle shook her head. "Barn's good," she said. "Smells like peace." So he brought them quilts, biscuits, a jug of water with lemons floating inside like coins. The children explored, climbing hay bales, chasing Pearl. Maybelle brushed the girl's hair with her fingers, not a comb. When Silas came back near sunset, he found her stitching something with a bone needle and thread pulled from an old hem. "What are you making?" he asked. She looked up and paused. "Just putting something back together." He didn't ask more. That was his way. She liked that about him. No pressing, no prying, just space enough to breathe. That night, after the twins were asleep, curled on their own little bed of hay, She sat near the barn door, knees pulled to her chest, watching the stars come out one by one. Silas leaned on the doorway beside her, arms folded. He didn't speak for a while, just watched the land, the moon catching the edges of distant hills. "I used to think," Maybelle whispered, "that if I just stayed quiet enough, still enough, he'd stop being mean." Silas didn't ask who, she went on. "He said I was too loud. Even when I wasn't talking. Said I breathed too heavy. Said the twins were always crying, but they wasn't crying, they were just alive." The wind stirred, the hay. Silas shifted, not to move away, but to sit down beside her. "My wife used to hum in her sleep," he said, "real soft, like bees in a blossom. I never knew how much I'd miss a sound till it was gone." Maybelle turned to look at him. He didn't meet her gaze, just said, "Sometimes I think we try too hard to be quiet for the wrong people." Pearl strutted past then, a piece of straw clutched triumphantly in her beak, like punctuation. Maybelle laughed, just once, then caught herself. But Silas was already smiling at the hen. The night deepened. The stars came down low. And in that old barn, older than memory, a woman who'd walked too far, and a man who'd hurt too long, sat side by side without touching, without asking, without rushing. The children sighed in their sleep. Pearl nestled under Maybelle's shawl, and for the first time in too long, nobody was afraid of tomorrow. The mornings came gentle on Boone Ranch. No harsh clang of bells, no shouted orders, just the lowing of cattle in far-off fields, and the hush of wind weaving through the cottonwoods like a mother singing lullaby. Maybelle would rise with the sun, not from alarm, but habit. She'd stretch slow, roll her neck, check her babies first thing. The twins still slept close, tangled like two vines grown from the same root. Pearl the hen had made her nest in a wooden crate under the workbench. She laid her eggs like she ruled the land. Silas once joked that Pearl believed she owned him now, and Maybelle didn't disagree. Days passed without ceremony. There were no promises made, no plans carved in stone, just the quiet rhythm of a new kind of life. Maybelle swept the barn each morning, humming under her breath, a song with no words. She mended her children's clothes with thread borrowed from Silas's old fishing kit. She milked the goat. He kept half for butter and half for company. The twins, still too small for chores, wandered wide-eyed between hay and sunshine, Pearl following like a bossy ghost. The girl, Nell, liked to whisper to the hen. The boy, Luke, liked to build towers from sticks and knock them down with laughter. Sometimes Silas would appear with bread or sugar or peaches in a tin, never with questions, just the offering. And that, more than anything, was what Maybelle needed. The townsfolk came slowly around. At first, they watched from behind curtains. A woman with children and a chicken showing up like wind-carried seed. It made for talk. But talk fades when kindness proves itself over time. Miss Ida came first. 60 if she was a day, dressed in lavender with a sun hat big enough to cast shade on a horse. She brought cornbread and called Maybelle darlin' like they'd always known each other. "You need anything?" she said, tapping her walking stick. "You send Pearl to come get me. That chicken's got more sense than most men." Then came Tommy, a boy of 12 who worked summers with Silas, freckled face, no parents in town, just a bunk and a harmonica. He started playing tunes in the evenings, sitting just outside the barn, where the fireflies came early. The twins danced, stumbling and giggling in the golden dust. Maybelle watched them, hand on her chest, like something warm was rising inside her she didn't recognize. Maybe joy, maybe healing, maybe the beginning of forgiveness, not for him, but for herself. Clayton never liked music. Said it was useless noise. Said the twins should be quiet. Said Mabel's voice scratched at his ears like thorns. She'd tried to sing once, only once, and he'd thrown a pot across the room. Said she sounded like a dog dying. The silence after that had lasted years. She hadn't sung since, but now, sitting on a bale of hay, with a baby on each side, a chicken pecking at her skirt, and a boy playing soft music under a pink-orange sky, her lips moved, just barely. She whispered an old hymn under her breath, and the world didn't fall apart. Silas, true to his nature, didn't press. He moved like the land, slow, patient, firm. He'd show up with a nail and a plank, say he was fixing the barn wall. He wasn't. He just liked being close, without being too close. Maybelle didn't mind. In fact, she looked forward to the creak of his boots. He never told her she was pretty, never tried to touch her hand, but he carved the twins a pair of wooden animals, a rabbit and a bear, and wrapped them in cloth like they were gold. And when she said thank you, he only nodded once and said, they needed company. She saw him once, late at night, sitting under the tree beside the house, head bowed, a tin cup in his hand, not drunk, just thinking. The wind lifted his hair like a memory. She didn't ask who he was remembering. She had her own ghosts too. I don't want to be trouble, she told Miss Ida one day, folding laundry under the cottonwoods. Ida, laughed Honey, you are trouble, the kind that makes a man remember he's got a heart. Maybelle smiled, eyes down. I don't think he sees me that way. Oh, he sees you, Ida said, tapping her nose. And not like the others saw you neither. He sees the brave part, the mother part, the not dead yet part. Maybelle folded a small dress with shaking hands. I think, she whispered, I forgot there was anything left worth seeing. Ida leaned in, pressed a kiss to her forehead like a benediction. Then it's about time someone reminded you. Silas began building a bench just outside the barn. No one asked for it. He said it was for watching weather roll in. But every evening after supper, Maybelle would sit there with her children beside her, Pearl in her lap, the sun setting slow behind the hills. Silas sat across the yard, sipping something warm. Stealing glances, he didn't think she noticed. She noticed, but she didn't mind. Quiet affection is the loudest kind. One afternoon, the twins ran to her, squealing with delight, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. Yellow, purple, white. Nell, said Mr. Boone, said these were happy colors. Luke added, he said they were the color of Mama's. Maybelle's throat closed around something too big to name. She turned away, pretending to sneeze, holding those flowers like a promise someone had finally remembered to keep. It rained that night. The barn roof held. Mostly Silas brought them thick quilts and a lantern, and a second jug of milk, this time warm, with honey stirred in. The wind howled. The twins whimpered. Maybelle curled around them, whispering stories about Pearl's grand adventures. How she'd once chased off a fox, true, and stolen a sheriff's lunch, almost true. The children giggled. Silas sat outside the barn on his new bench, soaked to the bone, just listening, not protecting, just being nearby. And that, too, was something Maybelle had never had before. At midnight, after the storm eased, she crept to the door and found him still there, dripping, quiet, stubborn as rock. You'll catch your death, she whispered. He looked up. Then I'll be the first man to die listening to laughter instead of gunfire. She blinked at him. He nodded toward the twins. It's good to hear. Maybelle didn't say thank you. She just sat beside him, barefoot in the mud, shoulder brushing his just enough to say, I'm not scared of you, not anymore. And in that moment, two souls, carrying losses too big for their skin, there was no need for talk, just rain and breath and the hush of a world learning how to heal itself. The storm passed, but something darker rolled in behind it. Not clouds, not rain, a shape from the past, a sound on hooves. The sharp echo of boots that didn't belong here. Clayton rode into town 3 days after the rain stopped. He didn't look like a man who'd come to make peace. Dusty coat, hair slicked with oil, not effort. And that smile all teeth, no warmth. The same smile that once told Maybelle he loved her. just before telling her she was worthless. He saw her before. She saw him. Watched her through the edge of the general store window. She was crouched beside Nell, helping the girl tie a blue ribbon in her hair. Luke stood nearby holding a jar of molasses, proud to be trusted with something sticky. And Pearl pecked a hole in a flour sack when no one was looking. Clayton waited until they stepped outside. Then he said, too loud, "You always did look good barefoot." Maybelle froze. She turned like something remembering a wound, and there he was, hat tipped back, leaning on a post like he belonged to the land. She didn't speak, just held her children tighter. He smiled again. "Been a while. Thought you'd come to your senses by now." The town hushed. A stranger's voice, too familiar, too cruel. It draws the eye the way fire draws the cold. Miss Ida stepped down from the mercantile porch with her cane like a sword. Tommy, perched on a barrel with his harmonica, dropped the instrument and clenched his fists. But it was Silas who arrived first. Not fast, not loud, just present. He walked from the feed store, no hat, sleeves rolled, dirt on his palms. His eyes met Clayton's with the weight of stone. Maybelle didn't cry, didn't flinch, just said, clear and low, "You don't belong here." Clayton grinned. "Law might say different. They're my blood." He nodded, toward the twins. "And blood calls what's his." That night, Maybelle sat alone in the barn, knees hugged to her chest. The twins were asleep, unaware. Pearl clucked, restlessly, sensing the wrongness in the air. Silas stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets. He didn't speak, not yet. Maybelle looked up at him. Her eyes weren't afraid, just tired. "I can't drag you into this," she said. "You're not," he replied. "He's mean," she whispered, "but worse, he's charming when he wants to be. Folks believe him, always have." Silas didn't argue. He just sat beside her on the floor, close enough to feel her tremble. "You think I should run?" she said. He shook his head. "I think you've run enough." She closed her eyes. "Then he'll take them." Silas's jaw tightened, not with anger, with sorrow. "No," he said, "he won't." The next morning the sheriff came. He was a decent man, fair when he could be. Said there'd be a hearing. Said Clayton had a right to request custody. Said the law was tricky with children, especially when there was no paper trail, no marriage license, no divorce, no birth certificates, just ... life. Lived hard. Clayton smiled through it all. "Won't take her," he said to Silas outside the jail. "Just the kids. She can keep the chicken." Silas didn't respond. Just stared. That quiet stare that had broken mustangs and outweighted storms. Clayton spat in the dirt and turned away. He didn't see the way Silas's fists clenched behind his back. That night, Maybelle packed, not much. Just the toys. Silas carved the ribbon, a scrap of dress. She didn't wake the twins, she just kissed their foreheads. Then she turned to Pearl. "You watch over them, all right?" Pearl tilted her head, then hopped into the corner and puffed her feathers like she understood every word. Maybelle stepped outside, into the dark. Silas was waiting at the barn gate. She froze. "I can't stay," she said. "Not if they'll get hurt." He looked at her, eyes rimmed in shadow, voice like worn leather. "They will get hurt. If you leave." She blinked. "He's their father." "No," Silas said softly. "He's just the man that left you on the road." Maybelle looked down. The wind tangled her hair like a veil. "I don't want them to see a fight," she whispered. "Then let them see you stand." The hearing was quiet. Just a room with wood floors and old curtains. Clayton wore a clean shirt. He smiled at the judge, called the twins my babies. Said Maybelle was unwell. Said she had episodes. Said she once talked to a chicken like it was a person. The courtroom chuckled. Then Miss Ida stood up, slow and steady. "I talked to that chicken too," she said, "and she's a better listener than most men." A pause, then Tommy stood. She taught me to play my harmonica better. Then the storekeeper. Then the school teacher. Then Silas. Not one speech, just presence, weight, truth. Maybelle didn't speak until the judge asked her directly. She stood, holding Luke's little shoe in her hands, like a talisman. I'm not perfect, she said, but I've never left them behind. Not once. Not even when I was starving. Not even when he told me I was nothing. Her voice didn't crack. She wouldn't give Clayton the pleasure. They laugh now, she said. They sing. They talk. About tomorrow. She looked straight at the judge. You tell me what that's worth. The judge ruled for her. Said the past was muddy, but the present was clear. Said the children were safer where they smiled. Clayton stood and stormed out. Before the gavel fell, he didn't look back. Not at the twins. Not at the woman he once called too noisy for silence. That night, back at the ranch, Maybelle sat on the barn bench. Silas brought her a cup of tea. She didn't cry, just watched the horizon. He sat beside her. You still think you're trouble? He asked. She looked at him. I think I'm alive. He nodded, like that was all he ever wanted to hear. The twins were inside, playing with Tommy's harmonica. Miss Ida had come over with pie. Pearl was roosting in Silas's hat, and Maybelle Grace, finally let herself lean just a little to the side, against Silas's shoulder. Just enough to say, I'm not afraid to be seen anymore. The days after the hearing passed like honey poured slow from a tin golden, thick and full of sweetness hard-earned. The barn felt different, not safer. It had always been safe, but claimed now, lived in, loved. The quilts were folded neatly on haybeds every morning. Toys tucked in baskets made from old feed sacks. Miss Ida brought curtains for the barn windows, bright gingham that fluttered like flags of peace. Even Pearl seemed more content. She laid an egg in some boot one morning. He didn't scold her, just tipped the shell into his palm and said, Guess that's breakfast. Then Mabel laughed, a real laugh, from the gut, warm and echoing. And the twins, they were singing now all the time, to the goat, to the chicken, to the wind, to Maybelle, to each other. Even to Silas, who'd begun carving them a toy wagon out of cedar wood that smelled like heaven itself. But peace is a quiet thing, and quiet things make noise when threatened. It happened on a night full of stars. Clayton came back. He didn't knock, didn't speak. He crept through the tall grass like a wolf, a sack over one shoulder, rope in his hand. He didn't come for Maybelle. He came for the children. He knew their sleeping spots. He'd watched from the tree line for days, waiting, hoping she'd soften, that the judge's words could be bent, like everything else he used to twist to his liking. But he hadn't counted on Pearl. The hen exploded in feathers and shrieks, pecking, flapping, clawing. Luke woke first, screamed, then Nell crying, calling for Mama. Then Maybelle was up, shawl falling off her shoulders, eyes wide with fire. What are you doing? She shouted, voice like the crack of a whip. Clayton froze for a heartbeat, long enough for the twins to run behind her, clinging to her skirts. I told you, he hissed, they're mine. No, she said, standing between him and the only things that had ever loved her without condition. You gave them up the moment you walked away. He stepped forward, hand raised. But Silas was already there. He didn't shout, didn't swing, just stepped between Maybelle and Clayton, like he'd been waiting to do it his whole life. You best leave, he said, voice low. Solid. Clayton laughed, ugly and sharp. You gonna stop me, farmer? No, Silas said. The sheriff will. And then, from the darkness, lanterns bloomed, carried by townsfolk who'd followed the sound of Pearl's war cry. Miss Ida, with her cane held like a club. Tommy, with his harmonica clenched in a fist. The sheriff stepped forward. His badge caught the moonlight. You're in violation, he said. You know it. Clayton's face twisted, but the crowd around him didn't blink. He dropped the rope, spat, and disappeared into the dark. He never came back. Silas didn't say a word for a long while, just stood there in the moonlight, watching Maybelle gather her children close. When she turned to him, breath ragged, hair wild, he thought she looked like something holy, like a woman carved out of stormlight and sorrow, who'd stood taller than any law. She looked at him with eyes wide and glassy, and said, "Quiet, you stayed." He nodded once, and said, just as soft, "So did you." That next morning, the ranch felt changed. Not in a loud way, not in a way anyone could point at, but in a way that made even the goats bleat softer, like they knew they belonged to something whole. The twins helped Silas paint the old barn door yellow. Pearl laid her egg in a basket this time, and Maybelle stood in the middle of it all, hands on hips, cheeks flushed, sun catching in her lashes, looking like a woman finally allowed to grow roots. That evening, Silas called her out to the fence line. The sky was all orange and purple, streaked like a story unraveling. She came barefoot, twins, tucked in bed, Pearl already asleep on her quilt. He stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt, eyes scanning the horizon. When she reached him, he didn't turn right away, just said, "This land's too big for one man." She waited. He took off his hat, held it against his chest. "I can build another room, or two. Don't have to be a house. Could just be yours and theirs, if you want." She looked at him, saw the way he swallowed, the way his fingers trembled, just slightly. "You don't have to say yes," he added. You don't have to leave." She stepped closer, touched the back of his hand with her fingers. Soft as a butterfly landing. "I stayed," she whispered, "because you never asked me to run." He met her eyes, and she smiled, slow, true, like someone seeing a warm fire after too long in the dark. The wedding wasn't fancy, just Ida, Tommy, the sheriff, and a few others in the yard with coffee and stew. Pearl was maid of honor. The twins, scattered flower petals. Silas said his vows in 6 words. "Stay, ... if it don't snore." Maybelle laughed so hard she cried, and said, "Then you best make room." That night, under stars brighter than any chandelier, the barn glowed with lanterns and fiddle music. The children danced until they fell asleep, on quilts, mouths sticky with pie. Pearl roosted on a chair like a queen, and Silas and Maybelle swayed slow in the dirt, foreheads touching, hearts calm. No drama, no spectacle, just the miracle of 2 souls finding rest in one another. Asterisk. Maybe you know a woman like Maybelle. Maybe you are her. Tired, underseen, trying to raise life from nothing but will and grace, carrying children and chickens and too many yesterdays. This story ain't just about the West. It's about what happens when the world finally says, "You can stay." If you don't snore, and someone answers, "Then I'm staying," and I ain't apologizing for being alive. If this story moved something quiet inside you, tap that like button. Leave a comment. Tell me where in the wide world you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Tales. There's always another firelit story waiting to be told.